Ghanaians have a concept known as Sankofa. If you've seen the picture of or a sculpture of the Sankofa bird, he's looking backward to know the way forward. And so I've spent the last 6 months reflecting on the past accomplishments of our network, the past successes, and I want to say here that I'm here to honor and respect the past because there is a lot of great work that has happened in the first 28 years of this network. And I'm also contemplating ways in which we can take full advantage of this unique infrastructure that the network provides for building and diffusing knowledge, for building a pipeline of women leaders in philanthropy and the social sector, for modeling best practice for effective collaboration and partnerships, and serving as robust champions for the rights and dignity of women and girls worldwide. As part of my own orientation to this new role, I've researched some of WFN's history and thought I should share a little bit of it with you today. The idea for forming this network came out of a joint meeting of Women in Philanthropy at the National Black United Fund and the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy in 1984. These were women who were in institutional philanthropy, and they were concerned and probably experiencing the effects of racial and gender inequities in institutional and mainstream philanthropy at that time. A year later, because of that first meeting, the first conference of 20 women funds was convened and held as the network of women's funds. And then 5 years later, Women's Funding Network was incorporated as its own 501c3. And so you know that one of the huge successes was growing this network from 20 funds to about 160 today. So it's important for us to remember that right from the very beginning, Women's Funding Network was grounded in the values of diversity, racial equity, gender equity, and inclusion. In fact, the first meeting of the identity-based funds, which we now know as joint affinity groups, was convened by WFN in California here in 1994. So the history of WFN is important so that we don't lose sight of the founding sisters whose visionary work put women's leadership, diversity, inclusion, and equity at the center and the heart of mainstream philanthropy. It is the subject of many, many conversations today and movement building. And we owe a great deal of gratitude to the funders who believed in our cause right from the beginning. And they're still the wind beneath our wing, providing core support when others are sort of wondering what difference does this network make. So I want to acknowledge Kellogg Foundation, and I want to acknowledge the Ford Foundation who were with us at the beginning and are with us today. So thank you. We also have to give tribute to individuals like Helen Michele Hunt and Barbara Dopkins, who are still in the movement, leading the way today and are with us. Barbara's here with us today. I haven't seen her yet, but hi, Barbara, and thank you all both. And thank Helen Michele and the Sister Fund for also being part of that early formation. So let's acknowledge them. The Ms. Foundation and the Global Fund for Women were partners from the start and helped co-convene important meetings that ensured our relevance to allied movements, allied networks representing communities of color, the LGBT community, and global women funds. So these are people who started, people who are still here and haven't given up, and still people who still have the vision and the passion that we are going to keep pushing forward until we create the world that we want to have, not just for us, but for the generations behind us, not just for women and girls, but for all of humanity. So I wanted to remind us from whence we've come because there are many new actors entering this space of investing in women and girls. And while we must adapt to new realities and remain relevant and influence the systems that impact the lives of women and their families, we must also hold steadfast to our founding principles and our values. The assault on women and girls today and on all vulnerable populations is as if our very humanity has been interrupted. We are in serious times, demanding serious solutions that uplift and unite us, not perpetuate conditions that widen disparities and perpetuate inequality. I know that each of you here as leaders shares my sense of urgency. So where are we now? There's a lot more history, but we don't have a lot of time. So where are we now? The Chinese have a saying about political, economic, and international turmoil. To quote, "There is a great disorder and struggle under heaven, and the situation is excellent." So, in that spirit, I can say that the state of Women's Funding Network is excellent. I believe the convergence of these complex social and economic challenges at this time in our history compel us to set the bar high for excellence due to excellent due diligence in our grant making, engage our grantees as solution builders, invest in ways that create enduring assets in our communities, and most importantly, see Women's Funding Network as an extension of your individual capacities so that collectively we truly can accomplish so much more. There is no time for business as usual if we are to succeed in improving the lives of half the world's population. These times call for intentional and deliberate leadership. So our network is 155 members strong as of this year. It's a little bit of a drop. I think there was a high of 166. But I am pleased to tell you that we want to welcome 14 new members who joined the network in 2011 and early part of this year. So we have now want to welcome 4 funds that are within community foundations, 5 private foundations and funds, and 5 public foundations. So you can see that there's departure and there's also entering. And I want to welcome all the 14 members who have a belief and are investing their membership dues in joining this amazing community. So I'm not mentioning them individually, but I want you to join me to welcome our 14 new members. Now, I don't want to call out the network. However, you know, traditionally we have reported on our collective grant making and our collective assets. And we get this information from GuideStar. Well, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of us in this room haven't reported to GuideStar yet. So the last data that I have is still what you've heard from Chris Grum in the past, $70 million and about $500 million in collective assets. So these are just the last concrete data points that we have, and we're working diligently to get updated information because I believe one of the challenges we have is to really, really grow our grant-making capacity. So that's what we've traditionally reported on as the status of the network. My invitation to each of you here is to contribute to WFN's goal of creating an annual benchmark report that captures our collective impact. In other words, what difference are we making as a funding community? If we're serious about addressing the antecedents of poverty, discrimination, and achieving systemic change, we must be able to define indicators of success and produce measurable outcomes linked to our grant making. After all, we require such accountability from our grantees. We should expect no less from ourselves. And when I say this, I'm not just talking about the count of numbers. It really is amazing. In the meeting we had with a cohort of funders on Wednesday afternoon, the stories that were being told about their program, their initiatives, everyone had unintended, not consequences, but unintended positive outcomes. And that's the value of making the case, because traditional evaluation is very quantitative for a reason and for good reason. But we are uniquely positioned to tell the story, to tell an authentic story of social change, because when we do grant making, we're just not making a way for a woman to get a job. We also know what support she needs to be able to take advantage of that opportunity for a job. So you may set out to have a job training program that links you into childcare, that links you into transportation. And we know that one of the programs has a leadership development program for young girls, and one of the unintended outcomes was a great reduction in teenage pregnancy among that group of women who were engaged. And so these are the things that making the case is about, is capturing the full power of the way in which this community is grant making on the ground. And we, as leaders, have every right to try to influence mainstream evaluation, don't we? Because we're doing the work. So let's not be recipients and reactive to what the system has set up, because we're about change, and change for good, not just change for the sake of change. So there's a lot of forward-thinking, forward-moving work to be done. And yes, there are winds blowing across philanthropy, but I say that our network community and our ideals are not obsolete. To quote Mother Teresa, we ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less than that one missing drop. So with that, the ocean would be less with that one missing drop. So I want us to be able to lift up that drop and make it visible for all the world to see. So we are doing very important work. And just imagine, a lot of the organizations that you're funding on the ground are not in a position to go to the major institutions. And so there would be a huge difference if this network and your funds did not exist. Our time together here is very important because it's space that allows us to rejuvenate and get re-inspired so that this network remains resilient in the face of so many challenges. Already this morning we've heard from Saskia about how women and how the systems are fast-moving and fast-changing across the globe. And I reiterate the call for our network to also become nimble and adaptive to changes happening in philanthropy and beyond so that we can continue to grow and thrive. So I won't take a lot of time quoting statistics because I think there are people in this room who know them much better than me. But I do want to say, let's acknowledge some progress at some level. So according to the 2011 UN Justice Report on Women, the progress of women, 173 countries guarantee paid maternity leave. 139 constitutions guarantee gender equality. 125 countries outlaw domestic violence. 117 countries have laws guaranteeing equal pay. And 115 countries guarantee women's equal property rights. So what does this represent? Well, it represents progress at sort of a state institutional level, but we know that the realities faced by millions of women is quite a different picture because too often these women don't know these rights exist or they don't have the agency to assert these rights in their everyday lives. And so passing these major state level, country level laws is important. They're important victories. But what the work is that we have to do is to, as we've seen from our own experience with legislation being passed and the reality of our lives being something different. So we still face enormous barriers to full human rights and equality. For example, 127 countries still do not criminalize rape within marriage. 61 countries have put severe restrictions on abortion. 53% of women around the world are in vulnerable employment, meaning without rights, without benefits, and without guarantees. 50 countries allow women to be married legally at ages younger than men, and we know that annually there are 10 million girls under the age of 18 being married every year, and this is usually not by consent. And worldwide, the pay differentials, the pay disparities still exist, and fewer than 3% of women are signatories, fewer than 3% of signatories to peace agreements are women. And in the US, although women make up 50% of the labor force, they're more likely than men to be poor. And we also know that 40% of women who are leading heads of households with children are living below the poverty level. And right here in the US, again, the full-scale attack on women's health and access to comprehensive reproductive health care is why that fifth shift in making the case is so important. How do we maintain past gains so every 20 years we're not going back around the wheel again? That really is the change that's demanded of us. So these are complex interrelated challenges rooted in complex geopolitical and economic systems across the world. No single organization or sector can solve them all. That is why I believe so much in the power of our network. As the largest philanthropic affinity group led by an unprecedented diversity of women, we have a unique capacity to truly lead transformative, progressive social change in the world. The movement and the world need this network now more than ever.